How's it going, everyone? As always, God bless you and thank you for being here. I'm Gage and this is Candy Coral Aquatics. If you're new to my channel, please think about subscribing and hitting that notification bell. This is where I talk about all things reefing, but more importantly, where I share the information I've gathered on my tank with you guys to help you become better hobbyists at this hobby we call reefing. For those of you that are new to the channel, please excuse my voice. I temporarily lost it due to heart surgery. So, guys, a few days ago, I put a poll out on YouTube asking what you guys wanted to see next. And out of a series of choices, you guys chose propagation for profit. So today, guys, I'm going to show you some quick and easy, inexpensive ways to get you started towards that goal. So, guys, the entire idea behind today's video is to not make you an expert in fragging. It's really just to give you guys some helpful tips and advice, what to be looking for, what to avoid, and then just kind of my opinions on how to get you guys started down the road into this world of fragging for propagation or propagation for profit. So the very first thing, guys, that you're going to want to be paying attention to when you're starting to get into propagation, especially propagation for profit, is making sure that you have both the time and the money to be able to put into this. It is quite literally a second system, right? You are taking the time to set up an entirely second system, which means two of everything, guys. So 2 tanks, more lighting, more salts, more filtration, more additives. Think of everything that you're doing on your main display and now times it by 2. If you don't have the time, desire, or money to do that, go ahead and back out of the video because unfortunately this topic will not be for you. If you're still interested, go ahead and stick around because right now, guys, I'm going to give you the best ways I think to help you out in starting propagation for profit. First thing, guys, that we have to make sure that we have is coral, right? Can't exactly frag something for profit if we don't have the coral to frag. Now, I chose to start off with zoanthids for the simple reason that zoanthids are relatively beginner friendly. They're relatively fast growers. They tend to be a little bit more forgiving than other coral. Now, I say relatively because I do not 100% agree with the statement that zoanthids are beginner's corals. Just because a zoa is a zoa doesn't mean a zoa is a zoa. And what I mean by that is just like there's different kinds of acroporas or monoporas or soft or hard corals, there are also different kinds of zoanthids. So there's more to a zoa than the color, the polyp texture, what have you. Some zoas like high flow, high light, low light, and everything in between. So just make sure, guys, that you are starting off with something that is relatively easy, like a zoanthid, but at the same time, you're not going to be wasting your time with. Zoas are very, very friendly when it comes to propagation for profit. Zoas are extremely popular for the obvious reason that, as I said before, they're generally very easy to care for, and they come in a vast array of colors and textures. Zoas are a staple in the hobby and probably always will be. When it comes to making money, a safe investment is always the best investment. And I personally don't believe there's much safer investments when it comes to coral propagation than zoanthids. One polyp under the right condition can turn into several polyps in a matter of just a couple of weeks, which can turn into a colony in just a matter of maybe a few months. If you go out and you spend, a little bit of money and you buy yourself, 1 or 2 really high-priced, nice zoanthids, yeah, it's going to cost you some bucks. But again, under the right conditions, you're going to be able to double or triple those profits pretty quickly. So zoas is the number one area that I personally would start with. Now, the other piece of advice that I want to give you guys when it comes to propagation is do not try to propagate something that you have never grown before. If you've never grown zoanthids, maybe just buy a couple really cheap, inexpensive ones, throw them in your main display, and see how they do. And the same thing can be said with acroporas, monoporas, euphyllias, and every other type of coral that exists. If you're not used to it, if you've never grown it, do your research, buy the cheapest variant of it that you can find, and then progress from there. Once you've decided what you're going to be growing, which, again, guys, another piece of advice, at least in the very beginning, try to stick to just one type of coral. Don't try to grow too many things at once because they all require something a little bit different. And before you know it, you're going to start losing coral. Some will do well, some won't. And this is really about making money, not losing money. Again, that's why I recommend zoas, because you can grow so many different kinds of zoas at the same time and for more or less very similar conditions is what they all require. So once you've decided what kind of coral it is you're going to be growing, the next thing you have to decide is where you're going to grow it. Now, I know that kind of sounds weird, but there's two ways you can go about this. If you have a large enough system, you can actually go out and either make or purchase your own frag racks. A lot of people might have a corner dedicated in their tank to frags on their main display, where they might go out and just simply purchase some cheap, inexpensive egg crate and then make some sort of a fragging system out of that egg crate. Maybe put some PVC pipe attached to it for legs or what have you. And then the egg crate is large enough that you can then put a frag plug into with your new fragged coral. So if you have enough space in your main display, you can make your own little frag rack, or you can go out and you can purchase a magnetic frag rack and attach it right to the side of your aquarium and start off by propagating your coral right out of your main display with just a magnetic frag rack and some cheap frag plugs. This is by far the easiest, less expensive, best way, in my opinion, to get started with propagation in profit. It doesn't require you to go out and buy more filtration, more lights, and a whole new tank setup. This frag rack right here has got 16 holes in it. It's magnetic, and you can pick it up for $50 at Bulk Reef Supply. Guys, that's really the best way to get started in this. Once you've outgrown that, it's now time to start looking into a separate system. There again are multiple ways of doing this. Please excuse me while I take a drink. You can go out and purchase something similar to this by Advanced Acrylics, which is just your basic fragging system. It does not come with any filtration, which is not something that I personally like, but a lot of your tanks are pretty much like that nowadays. But go out, pick out what kind of system you want, and then you start going for the filtration. Now, guys, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I really like canister filters. And I know some of you are probably thinking I'm nuts, but guys, if you don't believe me, YouTube it. You can have a very successful reef tank with nothing more than good husbandry and a good type of canister filtration. Canister filters are really no different than sumps. You're able to put media in them. You're able to put different layers of filtration in them. I mean, guys, they're really just a compact sump. The only thing that you can't really do with the canister filter that you can do with a sump is put some type of algae reactor or some type of a refugium in them. You can't really do that with a sump, but as long as you're keeping your feeding to a minimal, you're doing your water changes and you're keeping your nutrients low, and then you're adding things to your canister filter like Fosguard, which you'd be adding in a sump anyways, or things like ChemiPure or Carbon or whatever you want to use to help control your nutrients. A canister filter will serve the exact same purpose as a sump. No matter what you use for filtration, guys, the rule is always the same. Just make sure you're swapping out your medias and you're cleaning your filter pads, and you can really use anything to filtrate. If you don't want a canister filter, you can get a setup that supports a sump like I showed you in the beginning, or you can go really cheap and inexpensive and get yourself some type of hang on the back filter. I would really only recommend this with up to a 20-gallon system. And, a 20-gallon system, guys, not for nothing. You can put quite a bit of coral in a 20-gallon system when the only thing you're putting in there is coral. So you can get away very easily with a hang on the back filter or a small canister filter in a small system that's going to be having nothing but coral in it anyways. The next tip that I want to give you guys is whatever you are using in your main display to grow out those colonies that we were talking about in the beginning is what you're going to want to use in your second setup. And if I didn't mention it, guys, before you really start getting into this, make sure you do have some sort of a colony out of your main display that you can frag off of. This allows you to grow something that you've already had success in growing, and it allows you to save more money by not having to go out and purchase a bunch of other corals to try to start growing. So once you have decided exactly what it is you want to do, these, again, are some of the pieces of equipment that can kind of go alongside with setting up a separate system. Other things that you're going to need, obviously, if it's a separate system, we're going to need a heater. We're also going to need some type of reef lighting. Now, it's not important that you guys really go all out with your lighting. It's going to be a much smaller setup, which means you can get away with a lot less lighting. For instance, on my 60-gallon cube at home, I have two Hydra 26 HDs. If I was going to set up a separate fragging system, say a 20-gallon tank, I would need a lot less light, which means I could probably get away with something a heck of a lot cheaper. Like if we click on this 30-watt LED light right here, we could probably see some specs on it, and this might be all that I need for that, get out of here, pop-ups, for that 20-gallon setup. So just make sure, guys, that it's some type of a full spectrum light, but it really doesn't have to be super expensive. You can get away pretty cheap when it comes to lighting on a separate system, especially when it's a small system. All right. Next thing, guys, that I would like to talk about is whatever you're dosing in your main display, you should be dosing in your secondary propagation system. So, for instance, in my tank, I've seen really good things with Red Sea's AB+, right? This is that reef energy AB+, that's providing all the essential proteins, vitamins and minerals. It's that superfood that our corals need for good growth and coloration. If you're spoiling your corals in your main display, because in your main display, you want that growth, you want that coloration, we should also be spoiling our corals in our propagation system. Maybe even a little more so, because that's what we're going to be trying to use to make us a little bit of cash. So whatever you're using in your main display, make sure at minimum you're at least using that in your secondary system. The other nice thing about a secondary system is it allows you to experiment. So let's say you're not using anything for coral growth in your main display. Your secondary propagation system gives you the freedom of exploration. It allows you to say, okay, let me try out some products that are supposedly good for growth and coloration, and let me see if they actually work without having to run the risk of doing anything negative to my main display. Then you can go ahead and say, okay, it worked or it didn't work. And if it worked, you can now implement it on your main display for even better results. So we want to be adding something to feed our coral, something to give the coral the nutrients they need, because let's face it, guys, if we're doing our water changes and we're doing our filtration appropriately, chances are we're going to be running a pretty low nutrient system, which is good when it comes to nitrates and phosphates, but bad when it actually comes to the nutrients that our corals need. So we should be supplementing for that. Another thing that we have to be taking into consideration, guys, is the other things our corals need, like our major and minor trace elements, calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium. You guys know that I like all three. It's super easy, it's super simple, and it works. So make sure you guys are also testing on your secondary propagation systems for your main elements like calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium. Because without these, again, nothing will grow. And then whatever salt you guys are using on your main display, if that is where your original corals came from that you are now growing for propagation, that is the same salt mix you should be using on your secondary display. Remember, guys, we want to give our corals the best chance that they have. So if I'm seeing really good results in my main display and I'm using Red Sea Blue Bucket salt, I shouldn't be setting up a secondary system with instant ocean reef crystals because I want to save myself, $30. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be using the exact same salts, same products that we're using on our main display that our coral is already used to. Once the basics are set up, that can then open up the door for us to experiment with different types of additives such as foods or vitamins. I hope this video has helped, guys, and if you do it slowly and you use the tips that I have provided in today's video and you put a little thought and effort into it, I promise you, before you know it, you too will be growing coral for not only propagation, but for profit. Until next time, guys, take care and God bless.